There are two main reasons you would become a gladiator. You could have been insanely poor and promised a life of fame and riches if you survived the arena, or you could have been forced to be a gladiator by being a slave of war or as a form of punishment for being a criminal. Either way, there wasn't many people who actually wanted to be a gladiator. If you were born into slavery, you were likely raised in Rome, where your childhood would have been filled with hard physical labor and training from a young age to do whatever your master wanted. Growing up, you might have worked as a farmhand, household servant, or a laborer in the city, and if you had any access to education, it would have been close to nothing at all. Now, if you were a child born in a different country and captured in war, you probably were enslaved, taken far from wherever you were from, forced to speak a new language, and were shown the harsh realities of a slave's life in ancient Rome. The beginning of gladiatorial combat dates back to the early Roman Republic, around the 3rd century BCE. The fighting is believed to have been inspired by similar contests in other ancient cultures. At first, gladiatorial combat was part of life celebration. When a wealthy Roman leader died, their family or followers would host games, often featuring combat between slaves or prisoners. These early battles were symbolic, meant to honor whoever died. As the Roman Empire expanded, the battles grew into a public spectacle. The first recorded gladiatorial games in Rome were held in 264 BCE, and 3 pairs of gladiators fought in the arena in honor of one of their leaders passing away. Gladiatorial games had become a massive part of Roman life. These games were not originally created as entertainment, but to serve as a ritual for the dead. As a gladiator, you didn't have very long to grow up. The transition from being a kid to the gladiator life was sudden and brutal. You would most likely be sold to a ludus, where you would begin your training. You did not have a normal childhood by any means. The moment you became a gladiator, you were considered property, your life dedicated entirely to becoming a skilled fighter. If you were lucky, you might receive better food and shelter compared to other slaves, but your life would no longer be your own. From the moment you entered the ludus, the focus of your life was entirely on fighting and survival. You would undergo a physically demanding schedule where you were taught how to fight with various weapons, swords, spears, shield, and sometimes specialized equipment like nets and tridents, depending on the type of gladiator you were being trained to become. There were a bunch of different gladiators, but a few to choose from were a murmillo, who were heavily armored, wearing a large rectangular shield and a short sword. They typically wore a helmet with a crest and a protective arm guard. And a hoplomachus, who were modeled after the Greek hoplite soldier. He carried a long spear and a small round shield, and often wore a helmet with a plume. If you were young enough, you'd be expected to fight in practice duels, hunt wild animals, and practice all day long. It wasn't uncommon for boys as young as 10 to start training for the arena, though many of your gladiator opponents were teens or young adults by the time they faced actual combat. Your trainers were often former gladiators who understood the brutal realities of the arena. They would push you very hard, teaching you not only how to fight, but also how to survive. A gladiator had to be ruthless. After all, we are talking about life or death here. Your training usually lasted at least 3 to 6 months, depending on your age. I mean, they had 10-year-olds fighting to the death, so I'm not sure if it mattered how old you were. After you learned the basic skills, gladiators would be trained for specific types of combat, depending on your role. The murmillo gladiator, known for using a sword and shield, would practice with those weapons, while a retiarius, a gladiator who fought with a net and trident, would train using those weapons. This specialized training could take several more months to perfect. Some gladiators who were very skilled might fight sooner, but for most, the path to their first public fight was long. Your daily routine was spent training for several hours each day. Gladiators needed to be in top physical shape, so your training would include strength-building exercises and endurance drills. Your trainers would teach you strategies for combat, including how to read your opponents and exploit weaknesses. So you could try not to die. Finally, after months to years of training, you're finally ready to step into the ring and try your luck with your first fight. You walk into the Coliseum, and this place is huge. It's 615 feet long and 157 feet high. Basically, the closest thing you'll get to a skyscraper back in these times. The Coliseum could fit up to 80,000 people, and the seating was arranged in a tiered fashion. The lower levels were for the elite of Roman society, such as senators, the emperor, and other important figures. Middle sections were for ordinary Roman citizens, with different areas for men and women, and the top tiers were the cheapest and often reserved for the poorer citizens or slaves. The crowd's reaction was a big part of the outcome of gladiator battles. When a gladiator was wounded or knocked down, the emperor or fans would decide whether the gladiator should live or die. A simple thumb up or thumb down was what would decide if you would live or die. The emperor had the final say in the matter, though. Some emperors were known for their brutal decisions, while others could be merciful, depending on their mood and the performance of the gladiator. Famous gladiators, especially those who survived many fights, could gain enough supporters to never be given a thumbs up to be killed, and the most famous gladiators could become celebrities in Roman society, with fans and even endorsements. Your first opponent will most likely be new to fighting just like you. The newer you are, the newer your opponent will be, so it's probably both of your guys' first fight. Neither of you want to be here, but there's not really much of a choice. Either you kill each other, or someone else will kill both of you. So instead, you make the difficult choice of fighting to the death. You go back and forth clashing swords and shields when you realize the man you're fighting is your old friend. Most gladiators knew each other, whether you were both slaves and grew up training together, or volunteered to try and go after the better lifestyle. Either way, it was either you or him. And there was no way you were dying in your first fight. So you did what any of us would do and stabbed that guy right in the shoulder. All of this just for some cheap entertainment. While your opponent is on the ground with half his arm cut off, the referee is standing by, waiting to see if he is alive or not. The referee would begin the fight, watch the fight to make sure nobody was pulling any funny business like swords below the belt, and make the decision on who won if neither of the two gladiators died. They would declare a winner based on dominance, skill, or ability to land significant blows. And as I was busy telling you about what the ref does, the guy you just stabbed in the shoulder is now dead. So, congratulations, I guess. Now that you won your first fight, you're showered with everything you can imagine. Women, fame, food, and money. The only thing you can't do is, leave. As you grow older and stronger, you fight bigger and more skilled gladiators. The ones that are more skilled and popular fight about 5 to 6 times a year. And lucky for you, the less skilled only fight about 3 to 4 times a year. So at least that gives you a better chance to survive, even though you're already creeping up on your average life expectancy in your mid-20s. With every fight that goes by and every opponent you've slain, your chances of survival go down and down. Not to mention, from time to time, the Emperor would release animals to face off against the gladiators. The most common were lions. The animals would often come out victorious against their human opponents. Lions, along with other exotic animals, were expensive and hard to get. Because of their rarity and the difficulty of catching them, they were often used for grand public spectacles to impress the people and demonstrate the emperor's wealth and generosity. So, as if you weren't trying hard enough to survive against other gladiators, you also had to deal with a lion trying to kill you. Let's say you somehow beat the odds, won all your fights, which are usually 10 to 20 over a lifetime, and lived long enough to go into gladiator retirement, which didn't happen very often. For those who earned their freedom, life outside the arena wasn't easy either. Many former gladiators struggled to adapt to life in a society that saw them as just entertainment. But now, it's time for your retirement. You either retire extremely wealthy and get to spend the rest of your days enjoying the small time you have left, or you retire still poor, right back to when you started, when you were training as a kid. If you were poor, it was hard to fit back into everyday life. People still saw you as a slave and below them. Not to mention, your body was barely usable after years of fighting to the death. You retired in your mid-20s or early 30s since you were lucky enough to somehow survive. 30 was the average lifespan back during these times, with some people reaching to their 40s and 50s, and the elite of the elite sometimes hitting their 60s or 70s. So most likely you had about 10 years at most left before you joined all the gladiators you killed, when Emperor Honorius officially banned the games after a famous incident in which a monk named Telemachus intervened in a fight and was killed by the crowd. The spectacle was eventually phased out, as the empire began to shift to other forms of entertainment. But, unlucky for you, you were born while the gladiator games were still going on. So, good luck with that.